France, Spain and the RIF by Walter Harris 1927. Episode 1 Preface. With the opening of a new year, it may be hoped that an end has come at last to the long period of war in the RIF, a war that has caused almost unimaginable suffering to all concerned. Like all wars, it has been marked by acts of cruelty and barbarism. On the one hand, every modern method of destruction, the outcome of man's intelligence and ingenuity, has been employed. On the other hand, the innate cruelty of the primitive race has been let loose. On both sides there have been reprisals. All have paid, and paid dearly, the price of war, the luxury of bloodshed. War anywhere and everywhere is horrible. This war in Morocco was doubly so. The RIFis were deprived of all medications and surgical aid, yet the imposition of this unnecessary addition to their sufferings did nothing to shorten the campaign, and probably nothing to lengthen it. The agony of Spain was little, if any, less. The youth of the peninsula has died, massacred, tortured, mutilated, in its thousands. For the French the period of war was shorter. They were prepared for the encounter, but even for them the campaign was a bitter one. There were rude awakenings and cruel experiences. There were acts of great endurance and courage, as there always are when men, whatever their race or religion, are called upon to slay one another. But there is no glory in war, however noble and self-sacrificing individual acts may be. It is cruel, devastating, hideous. It leaves behind it a track of corruption. Its remembrance is a cup of bitterness. That the war in the RIF is over is a cause of thanksgiving at the opening of this new year. That it will never occur again must be our prayer. Walter B. Harris. Tangier, the 1st of January, 1927. The status of France and Spain in Morocco. The modern history of Morocco may be said to have begun in 1904 with the Anglo-French Agreement of that year. For some time previous to that date the Moorish Empire had been breaking up. A strong Sultan, Mulai Hassan, had died in 1894, leaving as heir to his throne one of his younger sons, Mulai Abdel Aziz, a mere boy. For several years the power lay in the hands of the Grand Vizier, and it was not till his death in 1901 that the young Sultan emerged from the precincts of the secluded palace to take over the reins of government. Well-intentioned, weak, misled and shockingly robbed, Mulai Abdel Aziz was incapable of maintaining order over the turbulent tribes whom a long period of repression and extortion had rendered only too ready to revolt. His plight was not rendered any the happier by the fact that the two powers most interested at that period in Morocco, England, and France, were united by no ties of friendship. France, intent upon rounding off her great possessions in North Africa, coveted the rich hut almost unknown country that lay between the Algerian frontier and the Atlantic Ocean. England, desiring nothing for herself in Morocco, unless it was Tangier, which she knew could never be hers, was firmly determined to combat all France's schemes to obtain a preponderating influence in the country. Accordingly the British government strongly supported the young Sultan in resisting the constant strain of French pressure. Germany and Spain, jealous of France's African possessions, gave England a moderate measure of support. But the bolstering up of the decaying Moorish government could not save the situation. Tribal revolt, misgovernment, corruption, disturbances on the Algerian frontier and near the Spanish presidios on the Mediterranean coast, indicated the end of Moorish independence. The British government realized at length that no assistance that it was prepared to give, and the assistance had always been more in advice than in substance, could prolong for any but a very short period the life of the decaying empire. There remained but one purpose that Morocco could serve, that of a pawn on the chessboard of Europe. It is possible that active intervention might have been a remedy, but active intervention was exactly what Great Britain was determined to avoid, and under no circumstances, less perhaps than the seizure of Tangier by a foreign power, would she have taken the risk. Only lately emerged from the throes of the South African War, England required a long period of peace. The death of Queen Victoria and the accession of King Edward VII had awakened a desire for a new foreign policy, and for new friends in Europe. It had long been King Edward's wish to see an improvement in the relations between England and France. His arrival on the throne rendered this possible. He enjoyed great popularity in France. He was esteemed and trusted in England, where his great ability was fully recognized. Under his influence the attitude of the two peoples toward each other changed and an exhibition of goodwill on both sides rendered an entente feasible. The first step was the elimination of the points of friction which existed between the two countries, and there were no more serious points of friction than Morocco and Egypt. It was realized that before any permanent entente could be reached these two disturbing elements must be got rid of. A single formula was devised: the withdrawal by England and France of their political interests in Morocco and Egypt respectively. England was to have a free hand in Egypt to continue her work in that country, while the closed doors of Morocco were to be opened to France. The withdrawal of British political interests in Morocco, where they were paramount at the court of Mulai Abdel Aziz, practically left Morocco in the hands of the power against the intentions of which the British government had never ceased to warn the Sultan. It was only when the Anglo-French Agreement was signed that the Sultan learned that the staff on which he had always leaned had proved to be a broken reed. It is to this Anglo-French Agreement of 1904 that the existing situation in Morocco owes its origin, for it contains the basis of all the subsequent arrangements, treaties and conventions which in any way confirm or modify the spheres of influence of France or Spain, or determine the status of Tangier. It is therefore essential, in reviewing subsequent events and the existing situation in Morocco, that the terms of this original agreement should be borne in mind. Briefly, as far as lay in the powers of the contracting parties, with certain non-political and commercial exceptions, it gave England in Egypt and France in Morocco full liberty of action. The benefits that accrued to England in Egypt are outside the scope of this work. By Clause 2 of the agreement the British government recognizes that it pertains to France to watch over the security of Morocco and to furnish the Moorish government with all such assistance in administrative, economic, financial and military reform as it may stand in need of. No hindrance will be put in the accomplishment of France's duty in this respect by the British government, provided the existing rights of Great Britain are not interfered with. In Clause 4 the two governments mutually guarantee that in Egypt and Morocco respectively there shall be maintained an equality of treatment in the customs houses, and under all other forms of taxation, and in the transport of merchandise on the railways. In Clause 7 the two governments undertake that they will allow the construction of no fortifications on the southern shore of Tow Straits of Gibraltar, or along the coast of the Atlantic Ocean as far south as the mouth of the Sebooed River, or on the Mediterranean as far east as the Spanish Presidio of Melilla. Exceptions are of course made of such fortresses and positions as Spain holds along the latter coast. So far the agreement was limited to the two contracting parties, England and France, but it was evident, and only just, that Spain's geographical position, and the fact that she possessed territory on the Mediterranean coast of Morocco, gave her an indisputable right to be a party to any such arrangement. Ceuta, Península Gomorrah, Alhucemas and Melilla had been Spanish territory for centuries, and in the far south, opposite the Canary Islands, she claimed a long-abandoned possession, Santa Cruz de Martiquena. Clause 8 states that the two governments, inspired by sincerely friendly sentiments toward Spain, take into particular consideration the interests that Spain has acquired by her geographical position and her territorial possessions on the Mediterranean coast. On this subject, it is stipulated that the French government will concert with the Spanish government, and will communicate to the British government the terms of the arrangement which may result between France and Spain. In the last clause the British government undertakes to give the French government its diplomatic assistance in the carrying out of the terms of the agreement. Such are briefly two contents of the Anglo-French Agreement of 1904. A separate and secret convention accompanied it, in which the proposed extent of the Spanish zone was specified, but which at the same time gave the French government entire liberty to negotiate this question of delimitation. So successful were the French in these negotiations that Spain was satisfied with a very much smaller sphere of influence than France was prepared to grant. The original proposition included not only the rich Garb plains north of the Sebooed River, but even Fez itself. It was a disappointment to the Spanish government to learn, after their agreement with France was signed, that they might have included in their sphere of influence these valuable assets. France and Spain having come to terms, the Spanish government gave its formal adherence to the Anglo-French Agreement on October 3, 1901. This recognition by Spain was followed by a secret arrangement with France, which was signed on October 30, and the next year, 1905, a second secret Franco-Spanish convention was signed on September 1. The following year, 1906, a conference on the subject of Morocco was held at Algeciras, summoned by the Sultan at the instigation of the German government, which had become anxious as to the intentions of England, France and Spain in regard to that country. The attitude adopted by the governments of those three powers, however, successfully prevented the introduction of any question that threatened the eventual operation of the terms of the agreements which had been signed between them during the previous 2 years. Certain reforms were introduced on an international basis, and the equality of treatment in commercial industrial matters was guaranteed to the subjects of all the signatory powers in Morocco. The question of spheres of influence never arose, and the Germans and their supporters, who had hoped to raise the entire subject of Morocco's future, failed in their endeavors to do so. The ultimate results of Algeciras were to strengthen the position of France and Spain in Morocco. In 1911, the German government having in the meantime left no stone unturned to hamper France's Moroccan policy, even to the sending of a warship, the Panther, to Agadir, and having at last realized that its efforts were in vain, proposed a deal. In return for territorial concessions in West Africa, Germany signed a treaty with France on November 4, 1911, by which she bound herself to adhere to the Anglo-French Agreement of 1904. There were a few modifications, but none which affected the spirit of that agreement. The German government formally recognized the right of France to extend her control in, and her protection over, Morocco. This treaty also confirmed to France the privilege of the diplomatic representation of Morocco both in that country and abroad. By this Franco-German treaty France's position in Morocco was greatly strengthened. Her predominance and liberty of action had now obtained the support of all the powers whose consent was of importance, England, Spain, and Germany. With regard to the other powers, the interests of which were economic and commercial, the Act of Algeciras gave a sufficient guarantee of equality of treatment. France found herself authorized to introduce into the country all such administrative, judicial, economic, financial and military reforms as she might think fit, provided they did not affect the status and rights of the subjects of other powers. In short, France became a recognized collaborator with the Sultan and the Moorish government in every branch of the administration. It was the course of events in Morocco itself as much as this series of political arrangements outside of it, that brought about in 1912 the negotiation and declaration of a French protectorate over Morocco. The Sultan, Mulai Abdel Aziz, whose authority at the moment when the British government in 1904 had abandoned the task of trying to prop up the decaying Moorish government had already become greatly diminished, lost the throne in 1908. His brother Mulai Hafid, egged on and supported by the influential chiefs of the south, had raised the standard of rebellion. After a long campaign, in which an intense desire never to come to decisive action seems to have been the common aim of both parties, Mulai Hafid gained the day. Both sultans, for at one period they hotly reigned in different parts of the country, were with limited adequate means to finance the campaign. The war was desultory and uneventful. Both were dependent upon the deserters from the other's army for troops, and the soldiers fought for whichever side could afford to pay them. On French advice and with French financial assistance Mulai Abdel Aziz set out from the coast with an expedition in August, 1908, for the reconquest of his southern capital, Marrakesh. Within a day or two's march of the city, owing to a rising of a supposed friendly tribe against him, he was defeated. His camp was pillaged and he returned to the coast a fugitive. There he abdicated in favor of his brother. Mulai Hafid was proclaimed at Fez and at Tangier, and all Morocco recognized him. He reigned for 4 years from 1908 to 1912, and though at first he showed signs of a desire to restore the fortune of his country, it was too late. Chaos and corruption had done their work. Weary of the struggle, at war with his tribes, at the mercy of the foreign powers, his treasury empty, Mulai Hafid abandoned hope. From month to month the situation became more difficult. At length, in 1911, besieged in his capital by the tribesmen of the surrounding districts, he appealed to the French government for assistance, and troops were dispatched to Fez. It was the beginning of the end, and in March, 1912, he signed a treaty by which he recognized a French protectorate over Morocco. It was the end of Morocco's centuries of independence. As in the case of two agreements with England in 1904 and with Germany in 1911, France's treaty of protectorate with the Sultan of Morocco included the whole of that country with the exception of Tangier. The French government was charged with the foreign relations, and the Sultan undertook to conclude no act of international character without the consent of France. The status of the French resident general, whose powers are most extensive, was outlined. The control of practically the whole administration rested in his hands. To this there was only one exception. Tangier had been carefully eliminated from all these treaties and agreements, that is to say there had been inserted a clause in each of them by which it was agreed that the status of Tangier should be determined by a separate arrangement. It was clear, therefore, and undisputed, that Tangier and its little zone fell neither in the French protectorate nor in the Spanish sphere of influence.